to ask, I'll ask them.
Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
before starting, I have one question, sorry, Julian. Is this RPA about UiPath or any other platform, Darshan?
So this is agnostic of a particular provider or a platform provider. So it's not about Blue Prism or Automation Anywhere or anything. It's agnostic about the technology. It's a perspective that I bring and I'll be share as I go along.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you, Darshan.
Okay. So welcome all to this session of Let Us Talk It webinars. And we welcome all of you who have joined in on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We appreciate you taking out time of your busy schedule during the daytime and coming in. But trust me, once you get to know more, you'll know that our only reason for doing this is to share knowledge among the community, to enhance the community in whatever small way possible, and to ask you, everyone who has joined in or who has heard about it, please spread the word. Please share it with your friends, colleagues, families, and trust me, it will be helpful. And if you want to present a webinar, or you want to be you want to just attend the webinar, then please email us at webinar@letustalkit.com. And little bit about the webinar series: we do these professional webinars every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. EST, that's Eastern Time. And we do Let Us Talk It Youth series Fridays from 12 p.m. EST as well. So with that, we begin this session. And today's topic is assuring robotic process automation bots, the promises and challenges. It's very familiar and common now, but we know that everything which comes has its own pros and cons. So, from the adoption across industries to its depth of purpose in enterprises, RPA is firmly embedded in the strategy of business, operations, and IT alike. This presentation will discuss the risks and challenges of RPA bots and the pros and cons of different assurance and validation patterns that provide confidence in deploying and implementing RPA bots. And to present this topic, we have with us Darshan Dev. He is an executive leader, growth and product innovation specialist, specialized in helping service providers, enterprises, startups, and product companies to harness innovation and emerging technologies, unlock growth, and scale products and as well as services. And from a personal point of view, he loves ink sketching. He said about the color black and white paper, and that's what attracts him. And he is also inspired by Indian mythology, and he has his own virtual interpretation of those. And he keeps his passions according to the seasons. So in summer, he likes to go for hiking, for long walks with his dog. So he's a fun-loving person. And in winters, as he's from Boston, he loves to do these indoor things. So with a great pleasure and happiness, we welcome you, Darshan. Over to you.
So thank you, Julian, and thank you for the Talk ID team for having me. So I'll talk about assuring RPA and RPA bots. So my journey, my foray into the RPA world started about 3.5 years ago, approximately. It was recognized as one of the leading technology that could bring hypergrowth. And I was responsible for running an incubator for a service provider. I had set up an innovation incubator, and this was one of the technology that we had identified to kind of use as an arrowhead and say how we can make it more pervasive, how we can make it more useful to our customers and to the industry at large. But as we were doing this, there were certain patterns that I kind of popped out to me, and that made me a little bit more curious. I started to poke around, talk to analysts, talk to advisors, talk to customers, and then I started, what started as a gut feel started to become more of a surety in terms of what I was seeing, and what kind of issues or challenges and opportunities existed with specific to RPA and bots. And that is what is going to be the the crux of my presentation today. What I'm going to present today is this perspective that I had from my direct observation in the field of implementing, utilizing this particular technology, and how customers, how different industries were adopting to it, and specifically around the area of assuring the success of RPA and the RPA bots. And that is going to, that is the perspective I'm going to bring, and I'm going to share some stories as I go along as well. So thanks again, and let's get started. So the first thing everybody talks about is like, I'm sure all of you have been on the web, made a payment, filled up a form, or submitted something, right? Have you ever wondered why are you asked always to prove your existence, right? So every one of us, anytime we go online, we are supposed to confirm we are humans. Why is that? One reason is the bots. The proliferation of bots across the globe has mandated that these interaction systems are made for humans. And the way the bots interact with them kind of disrupts the way the humans are supposed to interact. And that is the whole reason you have this captcha that every time. But in the near future, this is going to flip. We're going to have bots confirm they are bots, and will be kept out of it. So that's how I look at this going forward. So when we talk of bots, what exactly are we talking about? So in my view, bots come in all shapes and sizes. Now, if anybody is using a Roomba, your robotic vacuum cleaner, it's a bot. If you have a automated thermostat, it's a bot. You're kind of tuning it, you're doing it. There are industrial bots. All of us have used Siri, Alexa, Bixby, and you name it. These are bots as well. They are conversational AI. I mean, the moment nowadays you pick up a phone and call any help desk, any service desk, your first touch point is a bot. It's a conversational AI, right? So they come in various shapes and sizes, but not everything is an RPA bot. But before going into details about what exactly is the RPA bot, let's find out what it isn't. Usually RPA is confused with AI, and there's a lot of I would say interchangeable terminology being used. Whenever somebody talks about RPA or RPA bots, people confuse it with AI. So I want to make sure this is not AI. It does not have specific cognition. It does not have learning capability. That's a big differentiation. Now, I do a series on how RPA AI and kind of are powering the next wave of digital disruption. But that's a different topic altogether. It is definitely not your conversational AI. Conversational AI are NLP engines, that is, natural language processing. They're completely different from an RPA, which is a robotic process automation. And they're definitely not your Roombas or Teslas or anything that is an autonomous machines. So with that in mind, let's figure out what exactly is RPA. One of the industry definitions that is there, it's actually a piece of code. It's a very small codelet, if I may call it. And different codelets aimed at performing or automating a very, very specific task that replicates how a human interacts with a system or an operation. Actually, the process automation is a misnomer because it does not by itself automate the process. What it does is a series of automation and automated tasks together come to orchestrate a specific business process. And that is why this is so prevalent and this is so famous. And the simplicity of this actually makes it more ubiquitous. It makes it easier to implement. I like to imagine this as if any one of us has used, let's say, Excel macros. It lets you record it and replay it, and then you can put your own data. So think about RPA is a macro on steroids, or rocket fuel, as I call it. And that's a good way to visualize RPA. And with that background, let's go a little bit more. One of the principal reasons RPA is kind of gaining such popularity across industries, you name an industry today, and it has some level of automation and RPA implementation, is that it seamlessly mimics human behavior as it interacts with operation systems and things today. Like if you want to send an email, if you want to copy or paste a document, it does that seamlessly, right? So it is kind of very good at mimicking our actions, especially good at high volume repetitive transactions, end of day settlement, reconciliation that you do, back office processing, repetitive task, bulk email sending. All of these is something that RPA does seamlessly. Also the good thing is it is not tied to a language. Though now platforms are coming out and each platform has their own proprietary way in which you develop internal codelets, but typically it doesn't matter whether the underlying application is coded in a specific technology or a specific platform. It is on the cloud, on prem. It actually doesn't matter. It's completely agnostic to that. And therefore, it makes this technology even more popular, even more powerful, and even more simpler to implement. It does not require huge implementation effort like an ERP. Back in the early 2000s, ERPs used to take years. There used to be 3 to 5 year roadmap of implementing ERPs. You can actually use this just out of the box. And that is the one reason that I believe this technology is here to stay, and it's going to become even more ubiquitous as we go forward, right? So let's look at some of these use cases, right? I'm sure every one of you have, or most of us have deposited a check by taking a photograph, right? What exactly is happening is there is an OCR engine, there's an RPA bot that reads the letters, puts it in your different systems, does your ledger general entry, and make sure that this is credited or debited to your account, right? If we are actually, or if you've had an insurance, or if you've been in some sort of an accident, or if you have known somebody, nowadays all you have to do is take a photograph of what's going on, and it files the claim on your behalf. It kind of does all the paperwork. Think about this now, that these are the bots, these are codelets running in the background. Each one is doing a specific task. And, kind of, just, I like to also think of them as minions and despicable because they're able to do so much. And, they're just completely, what do you say, not very intrusive. They're completely non-intrusive. You don't even realize. So they don't actually manipulate stuff. They just mimic what you want to do at a much faster rate. So that's what I call, in my definition and my explanation of RPA. RPA is all of this put together. Now, because this technology is so powerful and because this technology is so strong, what has happened is there is evolved a marketplace around different type of bots that are being developed. You are developing different entities or code that are very, very specialized in certain tasks. Like, you have certain bots that just focus on data entry, like the example that I talked about, right? Very soon, or rather, I mean, there are from a compliance and regulatory perspective, there are bots to do the reporting. They do taxation at a company level. They do reconciliation, as I talked about, insurance claims, and you name it. So all the data entry, screen scraping, a lot of these can go. If any of you have uploaded a resume in any of the resume systems, it automatically pre-populates certain information. So actually, at the back, there is some sort of an RPA at play. Then there are integration bots. There are different type of integration layers. Now, what is also important is because no process can be orchestrated end to end, by any particular software. Even today, you have different things where you have a handover from a human to bot, or from a bot to bot, or from a human to bot, right? Especially when you take call center applications and things like that. So that's where the integration bots comes into play. You have workflow bots that take a file from one place to the other, right? Think of this as a conveyor belt. And then the last is the cognitive bot. It's evolving. A lot of platforms, I think one of the participants talked about whether this is about a specific platform. A lot of platforms today are kind of building some sort of a cognition, some sort of an AI ML engine to make these bots more powerful. And that's a very interesting topic by itself. We can have this talk at some later time. But this focus of RPA specifically, most of the RPAs are non-cognitive bots. So having learned the different varieties, different flavors, we look at some of these, example. I mean, this is just a rough example, especially in a call center. Whenever you call somebody and the agent sees your name or the number pop up and clicks a button, actually the bots goes out and fetches all the information about you. What kind of services you have, what have you interacted with them in the past, and gives this one screen. But it then waits for the agent to act. So there's this concept called, attended automation and unattended automation. Automation that waits for a human or a system or a specific trigger or a business rule before it can act or behave. And in other cases, it can kind of completely do it on its own, right? Like it can, take that entire transcript and send it to you in an email as soon as it ends without the agent having to tell you or something like that. Now, this is just one example. I mean, there are various use cases across the industry. In healthcare, you have EHR records. In retail, you have inventory management. You have in manufacturing, you have various use cases in maintenance, repair, overhaul, and a lot of these. So it is pervading and it is pervasive across the industry, right? These are some of the reports that I had pulled from some of the well-known, resources and analysts like PwC, Forbes, and all of them predict, though these numbers are around 2019, 2020 is a gap year, like all of us know, but still, this is one technology that has never stopped growing. It's actually growing at a much faster pace than any other technology, and there are big predictions, of it reaching, double-digit $1 billion in the next 3 years or so. So what I wanted to stress is that it's extremely simple to implement. It is a very, very powerful automation tool or an engine. It is applicable across the industry, right? So this is the beauty of RPA. But then it also raises the question that, with such a proliferated technology, what are the steps or what are the measures that you have in place to kind of make sure that it is assured properly? The other big advantage that people talk about and why even with a lot of challenges, RPA still continues to grow is the results. A lot of cost reduction, adoption. In fact, there was one prediction that I came across which says that more than 50% or more than 75% of the industry will have some shape or form of automation up to the range of 80 to 90% going forward. Now, if you just step back and think about it, I mean, not just the social impact of such automation, but even the ability, to kind of do all these processes and all these automation means that there has to be a very, very strong assurance mechanism in place to kind of, make sure that we validate some of these technology and how it is being implemented in the industry or in an enterprise or in any setting whatsoever. And that was the pattern that I was seeing. While I completely agree with its ease of use, I completely am for its ability to be implemented across different industry forums. One of the biggest challenge I came across was the way in which it was being implemented and the oversight, the governance, and the assurance around it. And that's what I want to focus on next. So here were the three major things that I observed. Right, and anybody who is in the development environment, or anybody who works in the IT services or even consumes IT services, knows that anything that runs in a live environment, and by live environment, what I mean is something that is actually that runs your business, is very critical, and you have to make sure that it has all the checks and balances and the toll gates and everything in place, because it has far-reaching implications and directly impacts your business. Because this technology interacts directly with the consumers, it interacts directly with the systems that the consumers use, or sometimes talks to the consumers as well, and sends information in self-service mode to the consumer. So it directly impacts your customers, and it replicates human action. So you don't have a human being who can kind of do the checks and errors, but you have somebody who replicates this. So one would assume that some powerful technology like this that is applicable across industries, that runs in live environment, interacts with your end users, is such important, would have very, very, very strong assurance measures, validations in place before this actually is deployed, right? And that's what I thought too. As I came across and I started asking questions as I spoke in the initial few minutes of the conversation, was that I saw this pattern emerging again and again, and I thought, wow, I mean, if this was something like this, there would definitely be a lot of implementation checks and toll gates and assurance frameworks and validation frameworks that would be in place. Unfortunately, what I found that was not the case. So, the way I look at it is that if you are having a software or an application or a code or even a small change, and it has to go into production, it goes through multiple layers of checks, right? You have the risk board, you have the governance board, you have the business approvals that have to be there. But over and above that, there are these, QA and independent validation frameworks that validate different stages, right from smoke, sanity, unit integration to user acceptance before it is going live, right? If you are a human and the bot replaces a human, right? Each human is trained. Like all of us do shadow, reverse shadow, on the job training. In fact, some of the businesses, have to undergo regular certification and recertification, like Series 7, Series 55, or GAP certification if you are in the healthcare, or if you're in the defense, you have to go through security clearances, and you have to renew this every year. So even if a human was interacting with the system, there are checks and balances. You are supervisors, there are appraisals, there are a whole lot of mechanism and things in place. But if you're a bot, none of that applies to you. To me, that was a shocking pattern that I saw recurring again and again across the industries. One, they were not so robust checks that you would do on an application software. There were no robust checks or training, retraining that was done if you were a human. But if you were a bot, you almost got a free rein. And I'm not saying that it goes completely untested or just goes straight, but the level and the rigor of something that interacts with your end users, impacts your business, just wasn't there. And as I dug deeper, the results were very obvious. I mean, all of you can look up different materials, right? This is pulled from KPMG, PwC, Forbes, and a lot of other reputed sources to say that about 60+% of RP implementations fail to deliver. Now, this percentage is increasing. The technology is getting better. People are getting better. But overall, it's been so disappointing to not see those results. The ROI is 50% or less, right? And the benefits are 40% or less, right? So does that mean that there is a flaw in the technology? No, the technology is good. The platforms are good. All the tools, all the products, the intent, or I would say more than the intent, it's the mindset or the way organizations have taken and adopted this technology and have started implementing or rolling out has been the biggest challenge. And that's what I've discovered over the period of time. And I see the argument as well. I see constant counter argument when I speak to people, or a misconception. I wouldn't say it's an argument, it's a misconception. I think one of the biggest is it is not a software. Agreed, it's not a software, but it is still a piece of code. It's an automation that is written or driven by somebody. So you ought to make sure that you kind of, check it. The second biggest misconception is, what are we really testing? Because, or what should we validate? Because the automation just works on an underlying application, which has already been gone through all the rigor. Absolutely true. And this is one of the biggest I've seen. For example, we talked about the check deposit earlier. The bot is actually just reading stuff and putting it into a software, and the software is actually tested. You're not really testing the software. But the mechanism of testing this is critical, and that understanding, or I would call it a blind spot, still exists. The other big thing is, most of you, or even if some of you are involved in RPA implementation and RPA this, you will know that in majority of the cases, RPA implementation or RPA adoption is run by the business themselves. Sometimes there is little or no IT involvement, which means that over the years, all these processes, frameworks, methodologies that the technology department have created are not available to the business. And the business takes this as an out-of-box application and lets it run. And therefore, you see that sometimes there is a ROI or a benefit degradation, or there's limitations on how much they can actually leverage this technology. The other I've seen is that people don't know. So what exactly are we testing, or how to test? Because sometimes these are packaged products that you work through an interface of an application or a product or a platform to do something. So you're really not sure what's going on and how you are testing it. And the last part is related to the previous one, where you say that if this is a product introduced by a specific vendor, obviously it's been tested. But think of it this way, I'll go back to my simplest macro example. Let's say you develop a macro to do some complex calculation, or you have your own trade portfolio that you are following, and you kind of do portfolio rebalancing or look at the stocks and how they're performing, and you create nice graphs and something just for your own pleasure in Excel. But what if your calculations are wrong, or you put a wrong formula, or you put copying the wrong stuff, right? You still need to make sure that you're doing the right stuff. You're not testing Excel, which is absolutely some of these arguments that we are talking about. You're not testing Excel. You're testing the way you're implementing Excel to achieve your outcomes or business objectives or your goal. Now, assume you were a business user and not an Excel power user, right? And you were implementing this software. What are the chances of you inadvertently inducing certain errors in it? Now, is it that the Excel is not working, or is it the way you implemented Excel is not working, right? So this is a very simple analogy. I mean, I'm making it extremely simple. It is not as simple as this. But these are some of the blind spots, I would say, or some of these misconception about this technology that has given rise to all the previous statistics that we saw in terms of who is actually validating the bots, or what kind of benefits are being derived from these bots, right? So based on this, we came up with this framework to say, okay, now we know what the problems are. We know why it is not such a big thing. So now what do we do about it? And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. So, it boiled down to these four things in my mind. It was more about the mindset and culture, as we talked about. It was a lack of understanding of these technologies and what they do and how they actually operate or interoperate with your existing systems. And what are the different, I would say, impact or influence of these in your organization. And, I'll mention a few interesting examples, amusing, but not so amusing when it happens. And the know-how isn't there, because each platform, like we said, are now getting into proprietary stuff, and each one has their own way in which you create bots. This is slightly different. Some follow a flowchart, a graph methodology, some do a hybrid of that, and so on. So you have to, depending on which platform your company or you have adopted, there is a bit of a know-how required, right? And then, of course, there is this whole strategy part. You have to make sure that you have to have a very clear strategy, not just in terms of validating what is being implemented, but what are you trying to influence from a business perspective? What processes are you choosing to automate, and why? And is that the right process in the first place? How many handoffs do you have? Would that make it even more complicated for you to derive ROI? So these are some of the things that you have to keep in mind as you start to develop your framework, or as you start getting deeper into this technology, right? And with that in mind, we came up with this 5 foundational blocks, as I call it. The first is create a strategy playbook. You have to have a very clear idea in terms of educating the folks that are involved in this. It could be the business, which is fine. It could be the IT. It could be a mix of this. Why are you doing this? What is the goal? Finally, what is the business trying to achieve? Which processes are to be accelerated? What kind of, I would say, functional decomposition or process decomposition they see, because processes are huge. They're orchestrated across multiple systems. Sometimes they cross business units. Have you thought of all these? And is there a complete buy-in and involvement of all these different parties? Usually what happens at this stage is a lot of process experts, Six Sigma guys, do value stream mapping, and they do it completely independent of the technology folks, or sometimes even independent of the business operations folks. They just focus on the domain knowledge and how certain processes are supposed to be orchestrated across different systems. What are the best practices? And look at this as an operating practice, and just focus on the process without understanding what exactly are we trying to do. And that is why it's very necessary to have a buy-in. And you have to have a very clear playbook in terms of who does what, when, and how, and so on. So this was a very important step for us. There are very detailed playbooks that we created. The second, as I called about, is the fit for purpose. I touched upon this when I said, are you choosing even the right process? Because certain processes may be so manually interpretation. It may be so dependent on this that you might have to have so many handoffs. We had this one process. It had about 30 decision points to be made by different levels of decision makers before something could be quoted, or could be provided as a quote for consumption. Now, in those scenarios, you try to automate, and every time you would have to stop for a human to actually give a go, no go based on certain things, right? If your environment or if your culture doesn't allow it, don't go for automation on these things. So there are heat maps that you can create. You can create and define how much of an value will you be able to actually derive from these processes even before you begin to automate it. So that was the second foundation stone that was extremely critical. And the third is the centerpiece, where I often tell people that make sure that all the principles, methodologies, techniques in terms of testing, validation that you have in the IT world are brought, and make sure that you do the same thing. In fact, the CIO.com magazine last year published a report where they highlighted some of the obstacles in implementation and success of RPA. And one of the key recommendations they had was to make sure that there is a automation test architect involved right from the beginning of this project. Most of the projects or implementation that I've seen, there's absolutely maybe a BA/QA kind of a person involved, but there are rarely automation or automation architects involved. I've seen cases where people have tried to use RPA as an alternative to automation based on either a Selenium or a UFT or so on. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about automation architects embedded in the RPA team to make sure that the bots you develop, are strong enough, are tested, and are validated for fit for purpose as well as fit for deployment and different things. And that is where you have to talk about behavioral, working actions, performance, entitlements. Now, entitlements and security, extremely, extremely important. I'll share some examples here, right? There was this big organization, huge field sales team, and of course, end of the year, everybody gets their target, they get their incentive letters, they get their performance stuff. So this company had already implemented RPA, so it would pick up, from Excel, it would pick up the table, it would identify people, it would work out the calculation that the HR team had spent about a month doing that, along with everybody. And this is typical end of the year for everybody. By end of December or early Jan, all the sales team gets their incentive letters. They know what are the targets they are supposed to achieve quarter on quarter. They know exactly what they are focused on. Now, guess what happened? The bot ran, everybody got their letter, and everybody was happy. But a few of them saw an extra attachment. And when they opened that attachment, it was that actual Excel sheet with everybody's data and everybody's incentive plans, right? Now, I was told that the next entire day, the HR team just spent explaining, what happened and what not, right? Now, that was a classic example where the bot did exactly what it was supposed to do. So you didn't have a proper framework in place in terms of what the bot was supposed to do and not supposed to do. Another example was, in one of the large financial services firms, you do this end of day trade settlement, and you the bot picks it up and sends you the report saying that, okay, this so many trades were done and so on and so forth. Again, something similar happened because you had a database of people who were your consumers. And obviously, if you are using a trading platform or a trading agent or a trading partner, and here we are talking institutional investors, right? Not people like you and me. This was a reply all being sent to everybody. Here one was the case, earlier case was a wrong attachment. Here it was just, the entire, your email list, everybody was sent, everybody is trading, right? Fortunately, those files were password protected. So at least some amount of, things worked, right? So these can have very, very, very far reaching implications. One other example which was there was a huge migration being done of a database. And once the database migration is there, then everybody's, again, this is again banking and financial services, so everybody's account and account details and everything was supposed to be migrated to a completely new database. So throughout the week, there were different tests being done for migration, failover testing, BCP. A lot of stuff was being done on this database. So a lot of I would call dummy data, a lot of different scenarios, zero account, and so on. So a lot of stuff was going on, and everything was played perfectly well, and the team signed off, and everybody went home. Unfortunately, the staging environment database was still pointed to the production because that's where the cutover had happened, and they failed to move the switch. Next day morning, or rather night, the bad job ran. The bots picked up all the information and sent completely junk data to everybody on their account details and everything, right? So here was the question we posed, saying that should the bot have had some self checks? Should it have said that, okay, if the account has zero balance, or it has negative balance, or it has something that is just out of whack, should it have validated, right? Now, that's not a fault of the bot itself, but how you design the bot. How did you even create the framework in the first place? How did you define the process that needed to be, orchestrated? And a lot of these, two-factor authentication, entitlement security, in a lot of places now you will find that bots have a unique employee ID. Some of these very sensitive information that the bots deal with, so that there is traceability. They are also given entitlement and rights so that one bot cannot look at the other system and so on. So now a lot of these are incorporated as a part of the validation system. So as you go out and start implementing this technology, I would really, really request you not to look at it just from a perspective of a checks and balance from a technology perspective or only from a business perspective. I think you have to bring both of these together, right? The other two, in my mind, the other two are, self-explanatory. The skills required are slightly different. You have to have understanding of the domain, the process, and a little bit about the platform too, because everybody has a platform of choice. People, there are many, many, many platforms out there. I won't name them, but there are many tools, many platforms out there. So those skills are necessary as well, and you have to make sure that you develop. The metrics are slightly different. You can't just talk of defect densities and defect trends or burn rate and so on. You also have to talk about ROI. You have to talk about value stream mapping. You have to talk about benefit to business and so on. So this is the foundation I wanted to leave you with, to kind of give you a complete strategy. If you were to tomorrow pick this and implement this in your environment, in your organizations or wherever you work, you have the 5 building blocks, and then you can create your own strategy playbook and do this. I'll just go one step further and talk about the 3 techniques that we have seen in terms of executing this bot. The first one is that before you actually deploy, you let it run and you observe what it does, and then you make sure it is doing what it is supposed to do, right? That is like a what I would call as a manual testing. If you are a tester, you kind of know that. Then there is a in-between model where you let the bot run. The bot does what it is supposed to do, and then you use an automation tool like, again, a Selenium, UFT, Smart Bear, I don't know, your choice. But whatever is the output or the outcome or the goal of the bot, you automate those verification points, right? You make sure that if it was supposed to deposit a file, you automate the process of checking if the file exists. So you don't have to do a manual observation. And then you can just check the logs and exceptions to see whether it's working. The more intensive, or the more, and which now is becoming a part of a lot of platforms, they give this facility to kind of do a self-diagnostic bot. So the test case harness or the test scenario is inbuilt into the bot as you create it, so that the bot runs a self-check or a self-diagnostic through various scenarios, does the checks and balances before it actually runs in the production, right? So these are the three scenarios that you can very successfully implement in actually testing the bot by taking the previous foundation frameworks that I talked about. Going and giving you a little more detail, we actually implemented a much more robust framework, for self-diagnostic bot. One of the challenges that we found that if we do not have a configuration involved with different flags set in and different types of tests that the bot would run, the test would run every time the bot is invoked, which means that your entire processing time amplifies, keeps on increasing every time the bot runs, and you don't want that to happen. And that is why you need to have a config file. You need to tier your different tests. That is my recommendation, that maybe if the bot is already run and there's some other bot that is changed, you want to do a quick regression or a smoke, then you just have that subset of a test that you can run. And make sure that when you are actually in your CI/CD pipeline, or sorry, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline, this flag is turned off because you want to do that, all the tests you want to run in a staging environment, and not done this. We did not have these flags earlier, and that increased the overall time of operations in this. Obviously, it was still much less than a human, but it still added every time you ran, and this was the framework that we kind of implemented. So in summary, we learned about the importance of this technology and how good and how simple and how easy it is, plus the proliferation of this technology across industry segments. It is applicable irrespective of whether you are from a banking, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, airlines, hospitality, or so on. All back office operations, it is useful. There are a lot of blind sites we learned about, misconception and blind sites. And then we learned about what kind of a framework, a foundation framework we could have in place. And then what specifically you can do from a testing perspective, what are the three methods and what kind of a framework you could use to kind of implement this. A lot of platforms now have these frameworks inbuilt. You can use a simple, a test-driven development, or more of a behavioral-driven development with a given when-then statement. You can kind of test a lot of these scenarios. So I wanted to make sure that you have a full picture of what was RPA, what were the misconceptions, how important is this technology to be deployed, and what you tomorrow can have as a takeaway. Take this framework right away, and you can start implementing in your own space. Finally, I want to just let you know that it's evolving. We started with primary automation. We are reaching to a stage where a lot of automation is becoming cognitive. Like I said, I've done a couple of talks in terms of how AI and RPA and other technologies come together and are now powering the next wave of digital transformation. But that's for some other time. And I hope you enjoyed the session. I wanted to actually give you some backdrop. I also wanted to give you some practical foundation and framework which you can actually take away and implement, and have some real impact in your organizations that you work with. So with that, I will say thank you. And I believe we have just about 10 minutes, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions or any clarifications that you might want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Darshan. It was like a teacher, after a long time, a session with, teaches every point and then summarizes it. So the students are all ready. So thank you so much. It was really very, I would say explanatory for the layman also. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. So just wanted to, remind everyone that whoever has joined from Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, please put on your feedback, comments, questions in the comment section. And we will be taking those questions as well. And if you have if you want to attend a webinar or you want to present in our webinar, please email us at webinar@letustalkit.com. So it's the floor is open for questions. You can unmute and ask your question. Any question from anyone?
So while you are gathering your thoughts, thinking about this, I thought I'll just spend 2 minutes. I know Julian gave a wonderful introduction at the start. I've been in the industry for more than 2.5 decades now, right? I've worked across a variety of technology.
Your voice is breaking. Yeah, now it's better. Your voice broke, Darshan. We could not hear what you said.
Oh, okay. No, I was just saying that, while people are gathering their thoughts, I'll say that a bit about myself. I know you gave a wonderful introduction at the start. But I've been in the industry for 2.5 decades. I focus on emerging tech, digital, customer experience, and productization. I help organizations, enterprises, startups with their growth strategies. You want to build a service offering, you want to build a department, you want to build a company. I do a variety of different things, and some very, very interesting things I'm doing recently with different people. Productization and product management, that's my passion. For taking something that's an idea or a concept in your brain, realizing that, and making sure that we kind of take that into a specific tangible entity, help you grow it, launch it, and scale it. And that's what I'm currently doing with 2 startups. And of course, I've set up innovation incubators, help you innovate, ideate, and a lot of different things. So if you have questions now or later, or you want to connect with me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an email. I'd be more than happy to help you or your organization.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Darshan. And while we are waiting for any question from YouTube or Facebook, just wanted to let you guys know that we have these webinars every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. EST, Eastern Time. And for tomorrow, we have the topic Building Successful Relationships, Dealing with Difficult People in the Workplace, Managing Conflicts, and Growing Strong. And Friday, we have Let Us Talk It Youth series. And Friday's topic is online schooling, the academic, how it's being affected, what are the benefits, challenges, and tips to students, to helicoptering parents. And we would love to have you also in the session so that we can have an interactive session. People who are facing such some difficulties, and if people who are who have solutions for it. So it will be an open interactive session, and the students who are joining are very, working hard to have a great presentation. So we hope that you encourage them by joining in on Friday as well. So any question, Jayant, from YouTube or Facebook? If not, then I think. Sorry?
No, we don't have questions. We are good.
Okay. So thank you so much, Darshan, for your time, for your, the informative presentation. And we hope that, yes, with the other work that you do, and even with this, we will see if how we can collaborate. And wonderful to have you, Darshan. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I'll be more than happy to do further sessions with you. You seem to have a very interesting lineup for the week. So great job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, audience, for joining in, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.